Welcome to the second ever Infinite Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Jared, joined as always with my co-host, Damon. Damon, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing well, Jared. How's it going, my man?
Good. I'm excited for this one. I got a lot of passion behind it. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how to keep talent talented, right? How as a strategy as a company can you really invest in your employees and get them to really produce, but in the best way? So let's jump in.
Let's get it. Yeah, this topic I'm super excited for. I think it's something that a lot of leaders are struggling to understand, even in today's culture, today's world, especially as we've articulated and we've alluded to the Great Resignation and how popular that's starting to become. So I think that this is going to be a very profound episode and a moment for us to really share some good insights.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that you kind of learn to share those insights is actually through failure, right? Like when you have a moment where you've lost somebody who was talented at your company and it kind of makes you self-reflect on that. I think the other thing that's interesting about, this topic is that there's two ways to approach it, right? There's the org level, right? So how do I keep my company structure set up in a way that is going to keep talent talented, but at the same time, how as a director and as a manager can I also keep my direct reports talented? And I think it's important also to articulate like the difference. Like a lot of times people talk about like, how do I get the most out of my employees? Like they're a rag, like we're wringing out a rag of like, I want to get all the juice out of this employee. When really what it should be about is how do I take care of this employee so that they produce more than what the rag concept kind of shows. And I think that that's an interesting distinction that we want to kind of put at the forefront of the conversation for leaders to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. We're always trying to squeeze every little drop out that we can, but very seldomly are we thinking about what it actually, like what the after effects of that will be, right? Like, every cause has an effect, every action has a reaction. So generally, if we're only trying to squeeze the most out of every person and we're not considering how it actually helps them and puts them forward, I think that's where a lot of businesses and organizations lose sight. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, it's really been a focus on my mind, just like with the work that I'm doing right now in my kind of people and culture team, which is to understand that this concept of culture is really bigger than, happy hours or bigger than just, having, time with your coworkers. What it's really about is from an organizational development standpoint, do we have systems in place at the macro level that is going to push our talent forward, almost automated, right? Rather than having to do everything manually in terms of that. And so I'm really passionate about like creating infrastructure within an org that keeps talent talented, and then having those systems in place dictate the behavior of the leaders to then reinforce that concept, right? And so how as an organization can we set up our teams for success so that it trickles down and so that directors and people at the highest level or managers, they feel like they have the opportunity to really lean into their team in the correct way, not in the way of wringing the rag, but more in the way of their development within the company for a long time, right? You brought up kind of like, the Great Resignation, and that's the hardest part right now is how do you keep people at your organization for an extended period of time? And the only way to do that right now is to really overhaul the infrastructure of an org, and that's what you're seeing out there.
Yeah. One of the ways that I like to look at this, especially this subject, when we talk about keeping talent talented, very, very catchy, by the way. But the way I like to look at it is it's an investment in the future of your business. And I think a lot of people, hopefully people that listen to this are business owners and business leaders in some sense. And you think about it, it's really how are you investing in the people that are invested in your company? Your employees and the people in your organization, essentially they're all investors, right? Although they're not maybe putting forth capital that your board members are putting forth and that, your owners are putting forth, but they're invested, they're putting their time, they're putting their energy into that place. So it's super crucial that businesses have ways that they're investing in their people and they're keeping their talent talented, right? They're helping them sharpen skills. They're helping put them in positions to do well, not just in the workplace they're at today, but the workplaces they'll be at in the future. And I think that some of the best leaders are people that were once upon a time invested in heavily. So I actually wanted to ask you too, from your perspective, being that you are still in school, you're finding your way through the professional environments right now. You're setting yourself up to work at different companies and things for your future. And the company you're with right now, you're very into the education and the growth and development of other employees. So I wanted to ask you, what are things that you feel you've noticed in your sector, right? Obviously your sector is education, right? Workplace education. So what are the things that you feel you're witnessing in the short time that you've been at the company that you're with?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that what I've seen is that I've seen people scared is really what I've seen at the highest level. It doesn't matter whether you're coming in as an intern to a company or you're at the highest level at the VP. Like those feelings of being scared about where your organization is heading are real. And so what's happening a lot of the times is that, for example, they're seeing the data when it comes to their retention and the reason why employees are leaving. And they're doing these exit interviews if they're a good company. They're doing these exit interviews and they're collecting that data. And what that data is showing right now with our kind of new age and what COVID has really just put gasoline on the fire for is the feeling of development and also the feeling of managing burnout, right? People are becoming a lot more confident in the ability to move within companies, right? Gone are the days of that employee who really spends 20 years with a company and moves up the ranks and you get them fresh out of college. That's not happening, right? So for example, at a school level, when we have, for example, like job fairs, right? And companies are coming into these job fairs, they're not offering full-time roles or like they're not collecting talent like they did previously. They're offering part-time roles. They're trying to sell these people on this potential for a full-time role, but they're not truly investing in kind of their people. And the reason for that is because they don't see an ROI in investing in people because they feel as though that retention level won't be there for them. And so that's really kind of ironic. Because what we're having is people who don't want to spend a lot of time at a company, which in turn, because they don't enjoy the company, and then the company is saying, well, if they're not going to spend a lot of time here, I don't want to invest with them. And then that's what's butting heads, right? And so I think that the companies that have that infinite mindset of saying that we're going to invest in our people, whether or not they stay here, and we only want the reason that they leave this organization to be to grow out to a different one in a growth role, I think that those companies are going to really win in kind of this new age. And I think that's kind of stressful.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you're a business owner and you're facing that reality, especially if you're not aware of what employees are wanting, you're not aware of you're aware of why they're leaving, right? You're like you said, the best companies are doing surveys, they're collecting that information, they're finding these things out. But to be a company who's at a job fair and your intent is to attract talent and you don't realize, oh shoot, I don't have the infrastructure in place that will help me attract that talent, right? People want to go to places where you're investing in them, you're helping them grow. I found what you said in the very beginning to be interesting. Can you elaborate? You said fear is something that you're really recognizing a lot of. Can you elaborate more on what you mean by that? Like what?
Yeah.
So is it the employers that are in fear? Is it the employees who are in fear? Is it businesses panicking because they don't have those people to work, so they're in fear that their business will go down? What do you mean?
It's all of that, and I would love to kind of dive more into that. What I feel like a lot of times with companies is that they're scrambling to fix this issue of their retention and fix the issue of people development. And so what they're doing is that they're creating these L&D teams, right, within an organization, or they're creating these DEIB teams, right, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging teams. And the issue that happens with these companies is that they want to have it be a poster, like we have this role within our organization. We care about diversity in our group, or we care about learning and development here. But what's happening is that they're creating that role and then they're leaving that person on an island. They're expecting one person to be able to solve the issue of diversity, equity, inclusion within their company. They're going to ask one person to be able to solve the learning and development issue within their company. And that's just not going to happen, right? One L&D leader is supposed to change the overall organizational culture when it comes to people development for 300 employees, for 500 employees, there's no way that L&D person can functionally do that. And so what they're having is that they're failing at that, and then they're wondering, why are we spending money in this when we're going to fail at it? When really the issue should be, we need a team of 10, not a team of 1. And that's the only true way to get this. And we have to spend short-term money on building this team out to have long-term staying power when it comes to retention. Okay. So those L&D leaders are coming to my team, or those DEI leaders are coming to my team, and they're saying, I can't do this. It's not working. I need help. And so we can bring in structure for that in order to support that L&D leader and support that DEI leader. And that is where you see true innovation, when they actually can have structure to implement these great concepts, these needed concepts, these new concepts that are coming up and growing. That is really when you're going to get excuse me, the ROI from that, when you truly do it correctly.
Wow. Yeah. I wonder too, in your opinion, based on what you're seeing every day, what are, I guess, like some components, like some key principles that you feel like leaders need to live by when it comes to keeping talent talented, right? Hearing from what you're saying, it sounds like a lack of support across the board really is what it comes down to. And the thing is, in all levels of leadership, there's an incompetency, I think, that's being witnessed, right? When you talk about like someone in L&D being put on this island, right? This remote island of fix this problem, right? And they're being provided butter knives to go to war with, right? Like very, very difficult to be successful in that type of role. So I guess, what are like key principles that you feel are super important that good leaders must implement, especially if you're going to have someone that's in charge of learning and development? What does a CEO or a business owner, what principles do they need to implement to help those people be successful in growing the talent around them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing that you really have to optimize is the communication. So I'm talking direct communication from the L&D to the CEO. The companies that have a big gap between what the L&D user is communicating and what the CEO is thinking that they're doing is a huge issue, right? L&D wants to move one way, that doesn't exactly like fit in our OKRs from the CEO. So I think there needs to be direct communication directly to the CEO, and L&D leaders should be the people who almost have the most access to the CEO. Which might not be something that a lot of companies think that they should do.
That's
I think the other thing.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll let you finish. I just wanted to make sure I say too. This is us totally advocating for those folks in the L&D space, right? Because direct communication with the CEO. CEOs tend to feel they're way too busy, right? If you're a CEO, you want to talk to the CFO, you want to talk to the CMO, right? You want to talk to people that are moving the sales and the needles in your business generally. You're thinking about revenue coming in, and I think the L&D space gets overlooked quite a bit. That direct line of communication is not there enough.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for building on that. That's exactly why it's important. And the other thing with the L&D team, for example, is that when times get tough, the L&D team, when the company shrinks in, when they start investing less capital, the L&D team, that's the first team to leave, right? The consulting is the first team to leave. The L&D team is the first team to leave, or they're transitioned, right? Oh, so we're going to move them into, an HR function role, which can be okay, but is there then capital and is there communication with that CEO to continue to really validate what the L&D is trying to implement? So I think that's kind of the first real issue and why so many companies are not having success with that. I think the other part too is that a lot of times when it comes to the L&D, they need to become a partner, right? They need to become a partner with the directors, and they need to become a partner with the HR team, because you can slap customer on the wall, or you can say that our HR team cares about our people. But if you don't have true infrastructure built into your company, if you don't have employee engagement systems, if you don't have true work-life balance, if you don't have a scalable workload, then all of the personal development that you're trying to implement, all of the culture and all of those extra great things that takes a company from good to great, all of it becomes void, because people feel like they literally can't take the time to, one, invest in the people below them, and two, invest in cultural events that would create the glue. And what happens from there is then we are losing speed. Then teams are doing things, in silos. And I think silos is a huge issue within companies that's happening. There's not enough cross collaboration. And so the whole system breaks if there's not great structural integrity. And so when I talk about culture, I always talk about culture with the macro, right? Like, culture is not something that you have in terms of creating events, right? At a company, like, oh, this is our happy hour every Friday. This is how we build culture. That's a load of bullshit, right? What truly creates culture is setting systems and infrastructure in place from a top-down level that forces those habits and forces the behavior that you want for the macro. And I think it takes a lot of equity to do that, a lot of capital, and a very, very talented HR and L&D team to truly implement that. And it's very hard, which is why so many companies fail at it, and now these issues arise.
Yeah, I love that word. It gets thrown around quite a bit, the word infrastructure, right? But not only is it important to have those direct lines of communication, which is that first principle you alluded to, but having that infrastructure in place for successful employees to be successful, for talent to stay talented. We keep saying it. I want to put that on a shirt so bad. Maybe we'll talk about that after this, but I see in a lot of areas in business that I'm in, you kind of see it happening all over the place, where the focus is just so singular, and it's just always about hitting certain performance numbers. And the infrastructure that most businesses are looking at are basically compensation plans, right? How do we incentivize and compensate the employees to perform on the certain metrics and numbers that we want? But really the longing issue across the board for all companies, it sounds like you've identified, is just having that type of infrastructure set up where these positions are attractive. And there's this thing called equity that you also spoke about. Your employees have to feel equity where they work. They have to feel like they have ownership in what they do. They're spending this time to try to be great for what you're trying to do, for what your business model is centered around. And if you're not investing in putting an infrastructure in place to help them grow and help their talent continue to expand, you're selling yourself short at that point, And one of the things that I think is super important for a business, if you're going to attract talent, is having that infrastructure in place. I want to work at a place where I feel like they're putting my growth and development at the top, because I'm going to help this business do well, right? People don't really show up and sign up for a career to do a bad job. But oftentimes leaders tend to fall short and the support is not there. When you're only focused on driving business, you're not focused on driving people. I think that's where a lot of stuff goes into cahoots and things catch on fire, and it sounds like you're really witnessing a lot of that from the different areas of work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I really am. And one of the things I think that is the hard part, and it really comes back to kind of a belief that I have, which is that you're seeing a change in the HR space. You're seeing this change from an old school mindset of HR is a defensive department, right? We react, right? We come back, hey, there's an issue that arrives, we bring in HR makes sure that our company doesn't get screwed, right? And I think that mindset is quickly fading in this space, where now HR is becoming an offensive profit center, and it has to. So one of the things I think that's tough for a lot of HR people to really understand is that we need to help the sales team hit their goal, right? And so how do you create that help from an HR team? If you can get your HR team to be in the mindset of a sales leader and understand what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and then create systems that help them, you're going to create buy-in from when you need them to do that personal development, or when you need them to meet with their one-on-ones in order to do them correctly. If you as an HR team can create a system that is supporting them, a lot of times what happens is that HR comes in and they create issues, right? They slow processes down, right? And then all of a sudden people are upset, hey, I can't do these things, or HR is creating friction and I can't do this as fast as I want to do it. And so I think HR, what it really, really is important is that they come in and they say that we are here to help. We're here to support you and what you need, whether that's building out incredible onboarding that gets salespeople up to date faster, right? Like that's part of an HR system is people onboarding. And then from there, if you can build that relationship with those leaders, when you would then bring in L&D at a later stage, it hits harder because there's trust and there's buy-in from the employee. They go, oh, my day-to-day is being supported by this team, and now I feel like I have the opportunity to lean into this second part. And as soon as you get them to have that mindset, that is where you're going to see exponential growth. Because as a company, you've set the standard that people have the time to do development, and I have time to personally develop, and I have time to develop my team. And so I think that structure a lot of times is missed when organizations are trying to scale fast, because they have to hit, certain goals for their board members or certain goals, for the people. And I think a lot of times that's why you see that being an issue.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of the article that you wrote not too long ago. I think it was a few months ago, about HR being more offensive, right? Being more involved in that realm.
Has to be.
It has to be. And I think one of the points that you put in there also was, that line of connection, right? Like everyone's always looking at the HR department as the uh-oh department, or the we gotta, the oh shit department, if you will.
Yep.
And that's not at all how it should be. It should be probably the opposite of that, right? Where the HR department is helping everyone around them grow and see growth in what's going next and what the next chapters are. And I think that is a problem. I think, unfortunately, HR gets a bad rap, and then you're not able to utilize the folks in the HR department. You're not able to utilize their skills to actually grow your business. I like that you say that they're always more defensive.
Yeah, and that's why you're seeing the change in the language of HR roles, like the names, right? So they're going from HR business partner now to chief of staff, or to talent development, or to people and culture manager, right? That's a huge role that is just blowing up right now. They're changing this people operations concept, and they're moving to more of a people and culture concept, right? Because as a company, if you can set the standard that that culture is so important to me that is now in titles versus people operations, it sets a real big mindset as a brand of what you can do. And if you're an entrepreneur and you have a small team right now, I think setting that standard has to come from you at the highest level, right? You have to take on that ownership of HR and people development, and that can be tough for a lot of leaders to have. But I think leaning into their team and knowing that their team has the time to develop themselves outside of their work, I think is critical. And I think there needs to be systems in place, whether that's companies, providing stipends for personal development, providing days off for personal development, doing cohort-based training as a team, and really finding the most quality ways to do it, right? Not everyone flies out, they do a conference for 3 days, and then they fly back, and like none of the changes actually have, but more of like a lifestyle, reoccurring, seeing data that comes from it. I mean, we're seeing companies blow up, for example, like Culture Amp. They just acquired a company called Disco, which does appreciations, and Culture Amp just raised, I think, millions of dollars, and they're in like a Series F right now. I mean, they have so much capital, and you're seeing companies like Kazoo grow up. You see companies like, Rippling changing how you onboard people. And I think that is the direct result of HR leaders feeling like they have to spend more time in order to go on the offensive, and they need those defensive principles automated now. And I think with coming technology, growing SaaS companies, that's going to be a huge focus, and you're only going to see those companies get more money and explode.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because even the company that I work with, most of my time full time right now, we implemented a very similar position where we have someone who's solely in charge of culture and really being that middle person, if you will, right? They talk to everyone in the C-suite, and then they also have to manage the emotions and help us keep everything in check for the people in the field. And you kind of have that responsibility to bridge that gap and bring those things together. So I guess what I want to ask you too, I know we were talking a little bit about CEOs and higher C-suite positions having those direct lines of communication. I'm curious to know, in your opinion, how can CEOs, if there's a CEO or a high-level C-suite person listening to this right now, what are the important things, the conversations that need to be had every day when those direct line of communications are open? What conversations, in your opinion, need to be had between the culture person and the CEO that really will bring their companies to the forefront? Because you're talking a lot about different startups and a lot of young companies that are figuring this out, right? It seems like they've found a good solution to what a lot of businesses are looking at as a problem with this great resignation. So what are, I guess, like top things that need to be addressed every time those two people talk? When you're talking about a CEO and a culture leader, developer, what needs to happen and what things need to be talked about?
It's a great question. I don't think there's a great answer right now. I don't think companies have it figured out. I think one of the things that you have to manage is that person who is meeting with the is that culture person who's meeting with the C-suite executive, do they truly understand what's happening at the lowest rank? Right. And I think a lot of times they don't. Yeah. I think a lot of times that culture person, they talk to managers, they talk to directors, they talk to people who oversee people. They don't talk to the people who are at the lowest level. And I think that's a failure. And I think that is because they don't have quality systems in place, right? Like whether it's a 360 survey, whether it's an engagement survey, at the minimum, sending out a company survey is like the bare minimum you can do. And companies don't even do that effectively. They don't even truly understand the data that they're receiving back. But can you actually have conversations? A lot of things that are coming up right now, for example, are stay interviews, where we're flipping the script of interviewing people to stay at a company.
Wow.
And they're asking these questions, right? And I think that those, you see that's part of Gary V's, his chief heart officer, or chief, it's really chief of staff, but chief heart officer, she really brought up this concept of stay interviews, and she's implementing this. She meets with 4 people within the company every week, right? And she's just working her way through the company, and then it circles back, right? And so she's meeting from the top C-suite executive all the way down. And so that person is going to have the pulse. And so if your culture person is not talking to the people at the lowest level, then it's a failure as an organization and as a vision to have that happen, right? And so I think until they do that, until they're effectively running, engagement surveys and truly creating actionable steps, right? Like asking quality questions in the survey that lead to actionable steps, right? Our company recently rolled out an engagement survey, and one of the biggest parts was like, does my manager give me great feedback? Right? And so we were able to see from a department side what parts what departments gave great feedback and what departments did not. And then as a people operations team, we supply the resources to create an actionable step for that department to improve that process immediately.
Wow.
And so if your culture manager is not implementing those types of systems, right? It's not more happy hours that's going to help, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be truly creating a system and supporting the director, right? You have a sales director who feels like he doesn't have time to meet with and truly lean into his team because of these goals. Well, then the people operations teams needs to help him accelerate that process and take over all of that for him so that he can truly just simply execute on that. And that's how you create that glue with the HR team to then leads into learning development, right? Circling back to what we were saying. So if HR can go on offensively to support these systems, the back end version can be the personal growth. And leaders will love that when that happens because they feel like they can go to HR and that they get true support.
Yeah, that's big. And HR, like we keep trying to say, like HR should not be the department that people are defensive about or scared to, interact with. What I find really interesting too on this subject, I find that a lot of leaders, they feel that they need to be the ones that have the answers all the time. Right? People that are in the C-suite, they feel like they need to know the answers. They need to have all the answers. People that are working in cultural talent development, learning and development, they feel like they need to also have those answers. I think what's really interesting and what's been a real awakening to me, especially when I started some of my own businesses, one of the things that really opened my eyes is realizing that the knowledge and the power and the ability to grow is really all within the people that you technically have beneath you, right? Top-down leadership, you should be working for your employees, but at the end of the day, we're always taught that if you're a leader, you're the one that has the answers, when really the people below you have all the answers. In my current role right now, I have 5 managers that I oversee and work with, and what I find is through these conversations I have with them, we've done way better when I ask them what needs to be done. Right? Because your job as a leader isn't to have all the answers. Your job is to be able to coach people through finding the answers, and they have the answers within. If you take the time to actually talk to people, get their feedback. You even said surveys, right? Companies send out these surveys, they get the data back, they don't really know what to do with all the data all at once. And I think it's super important that we're aspiring to inspire, right? And we're aspiring to inspire when you have a leader who's willing to let you have that equity and have a say in how things should be run and how things should be done to help the business grow. I think that creates such a strong culture and such a strong buy-in from your leaders that you just start to see that spider web effect. And then you're putting those leaders in great positions to accomplish amazing things for your business and your organization. But oftentimes as leaders, we're trying to take everything ourselves and do everything ourselves and have all the answers. And I think that's where a lot of leaders fall short.
It's not about having the best solution. It's about having the best cooperation.
Yeah.
Right. Even if the answer that you come to with, in those meetings is not the most optimized answer, if that manager is bought into executing the concept, that's far more powerful than just having the perfect answer.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's their idea. It's what they want to do. And whether they know it or not, they know their team better than anyone. And there's something about them that's saying that they need to execute it in that way. And I think as a leader, we need to empower them to do that, support them to do that. And most times, more likely than not, even if it's not that great of an idea, if they're passionate about it, they're going to go out and they're going to execute it, right? They're going to figure out a way to get it done, even if it's not great, even if it, I think the conversation of like it falls, not fails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Even if it falls a couple times and they tweak it and then they change it. Well, now all of a sudden they're growing as a leader, right? They're assessing their own idea that they want to have. They're improving upon it, and then they're going out and executing it. I mean, how much better with growth development can you get than that? And so as a leader, I totally agree that you need to just be that sounding board for them and then empower them to continue to iterate on their fallings and on their possible failures. And that's how you're going to get their true personal development growth. And then when they lean into, the L&D space and they start to go on that journey as well, all of a sudden they have a lot of great memories to kind of look back at, to see things through a different lens and constantly improve upon themselves. And we kind of talk about kind of going back to last podcast of the assembly line workers and the changing of the lights, right? They felt that, even whether the changing of the lights helped or it didn't help, the fact that they were being taken care of was the most important part. And I think as a leader, as somebody who oversees managers and oversees people, they can feel that as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, the subject and the title of this episode is going to be Keeping Talent Talented. Right. And I think that there's there hopefully in a lot of businesses, the businesses that last to have staying power. And, we can look back 10, 15 years from now and we can say, wow, it's crazy to think that those startups and those businesses actually sustained and stayed alive. Because business is a very savage, it's a battle royale. It's a Russian roulette in some areas. It's a way, where a lot of most corporations will fail and will not last. But I think that the businesses that are truly investing in their people, keeping their talent talented, are the ones that keep people around and stay in business. The other side to it too, like there is this side of paying your employees well, of course, having benefits, having things that attract talent to your organization. But the number one thing is always just like, what are they doing to help those people grow and be better versions of themselves? There's a lot of people, even including myself and maybe even including you, Jared, will forego a higher pay for the opportunity of growth and development. Right? A lot of people, you'd be surprised, want to leave a legacy. It's not always about just making the most money that they can make. Sometimes it's about leaving a legacy and something that they can be proud of, something they can say that they helped build. So I feel like there's always a lot of value in that. Again, that goes back to the equity talk, right? And I think it's like sweat equity in that sense.
Two things from that. One, as a leader, if you do not know what motivates your team, if you do not know whether it's title, whether it's financial, maybe they had a baby recently and now it's work-life balance. If you are not in the weeds of your people and truly understanding what they value, then you're doing it wrong. And you need to immediately have, a dinner with somebody and get that kind of glue to really understand what they need. The other portion is that if you want to see a company who's executing it well, Apple has one of the smallest recruiting teams of any company. And the reason for that is because they keep people. Because, for example, they give part-time people equity and stock options with Apple. At the lowest level, they're supporting these people. They have personal development days for these people at part-time. And then because of that, they can save money on the retention side because they hardly ever have to hire people. They have one of the lowest capital for recruiting. And so now maybe not every company would be able to actually institute that, right? Apple's a big company, but it's something interesting to think about. And it's what's putting them ahead, right, in this space. They're not struggling right now during the Great Resignation. They're not having to hire a bunch of people like other companies are. They're not having to increase wages because they were already set there and they future-proofed themselves. And I think that is a great example and a company to look to, for that true substance and really a true example of that this is possible at the highest level and at the lowest levels.
Yeah, and I think also it's super important. Personally, I have to get this out. I think it's also important to distinguish when you are talking about like what Apple is doing and how they're doing that. We're not talking about the manufacturing side. We're not talking about the fact that Apple has had virtually no supply chain issues. We're not talking about the manufacturing side. We're talking about, what we see here in the States as far as like the retail side, again, the C-suite type, yes. Right? The in-office. So, those are the things that we're talking about. But you're right, 100%. I mean, the companies, there's so many companies right now that are maybe over-investing in recruiting, in talent acquisition. I find it almost humorous to see some businesses they have bonuses, $5,000 bonuses for people to accept a job, right? There are some businesses that they're ending up with people that are literally just there for that bonus and then they're going to be gone. So I think that all these resources are going into finding talent. And again, back to the name of this episode, right? Keeping talent talented. There's very little infrastructure and funding that businesses are looking at putting into keeping the talent that they have. It's always, just trying to move on to the next thing instead of reinvesting in the people that you already have. And I find that very, very profound that you use Apple as a good example there, because that's spot on.
Yeah. The recruiting is a huge issue right now, right? And the companies that are failing at it are the companies that think that they need to have a really robust recruiting system. Yeah. That's a finite mindset, right? That goes against kind of everything that we think about, right? We need to set ourselves up for really the macro and for the growth long term. And I think while having a robust recruiting team is important, truly having systems in place for when they come on board is what's the most important, and that's how you're going to really keep talent talented.
Absolutely. And one more thing I want to say, because you've said so much valuable stuff today. I appreciate it because you're in that L&D space. You've done a lot of work with HR departments, and so you're privy to that. You understand that very well. And I'm in the field, and I'm working with different teams. My real estate team, a lot of this conversation we're having right now, a lot of this makes me think about the future of what that team looks like too. And I think something that I read in an article about 5 reasons to invest in your employees. I have to figure out where this article came from again so we can cite it in the little Chiron thing. Yeah, but mm-hmm. The investment of your employees, I think the biggest takeaway I got from this article I read was helping your organization be future ready, right? Future proofing your business. So, when you talked about like Apple and how they've been able to amass this success so far, I think one of the things that a lot of the great businesses are doing is they're looking at this cultural development side and this side of improving relations with their employees. They're looking at this as an opportunity to future proof their organization. Funding tends to happen for some businesses annually or semi-annually, right? And they're looking at how do I hit that next pillar? How do we hit that next goal? How do we hit that next target? But what's interesting is every ounce of energy that you're putting into helping keep the talent that you have is actually future-proofing that organization to be able to sustain growth over time. And you're seeing that a lot with even like companies like Tesla, Amazon companies. And again, we're not going to talk too much about the different working conditions for some of these companies. There's a lot of things up in the air. It's a
a
whole,
whole
different
different
podcast. But you know, when you talk about, wow, look at the last 10 years and what it's been like for growth, there's a level of future proofing that's happened in a lot of these different companies. And while a lot of them miss the mark, I think that there's some companies that are figuring this out right now, right? The more we're investing right now, this is paying off in 10 years. This is paying off in 15 years. It's not always that you write a check, you sell a certain product, you get that revenue, and you just reinvest into different assets. Sometimes the best assets, most of the time the best assets, are the people in the organization that are helping drive that revenue to begin with. So when I see certain people in articles, even just journalists writing like future proofing your business, I think that's probably a very, very underrated strategy that doesn't give you an immediate return. It doesn't fill that dopamine right away. But man, if you invest in those people and you have the right people in that organization, it's amazing what that does for you in the next 10 to 15 years. And it oftentimes, again, if you're a business owner, you're not going to realize that until year 10 arrives, you know? And then you can look back. Hindsight's always 2020. You can look back and say, wow, that was definitely worth that investment.
Yeah, I want to let that breathe. Let's create some actionable steps that people can do right now. So if you're listening to this podcast, you made it to this point, first of all, thank you. What actionable steps would we recommend? Well, I think you really need to meet with kind of the people that you oversee for 30 minutes and really understand what is motivating for them. You know, what is it title? Is it work-life balance? What's happening in their life? What makes them come to work? And I think you need to create actionable steps as a leader for those people. And if you're somebody who's meeting with a manager, maybe you're in a lower position, I think it's perfectly fine to have the same type of conversation, right? Understanding from my leader, this is something that you and I did when you were, you know, my boss, understanding that what is motivating my leader right now, what goals and pressures are they feeling, and how can I lead upwards to help support them in their growth, which in turn will help their development towards me. And so I think you need to create that glue, and you need to reach out and you need to have those conversations and understand what's the vision of growth for both of us here and what we're doing.
Yeah. And then the actionable step I want to leave our listeners and our audience, I think it's don't be quick to have the answers, right? Don't be quick to be the one that has the solutions. Be quick to find the solutions, and find those solutions by having conversations. So I'm going to echo your point, but you know, listen to the people in your organization, right? Let them be the ones that help you find the solutions to the problems that you're going through and that you're experiencing. You know, growth is a good problem to have. But listen to the people that are running the business every day, that are putting in the work every day, that are in the field, that are working with the community, you know, working with the consumers. Listen to the people and let them be the ones that have the solution. Don't always be the one that has the answers. So I think that's another actionable item that's super important.
Seek first to understand and then to be understood.
Seek first to understand and then to be understood. I like that. That's a good tattoo.
Yeah, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for listening.
Everybody.
Reach out to us on socials and follow us here on YouTube.